My name is Helen Crawford, and I am 72 years old. I've always thought of myself as a practical woman, quiet, dependable, and perhaps a little too forgiving for my own good. I grew up in a time when money wasn't just a number on a screen, but something you held, stretched, and respected. My late husband, Harold, used to say that I could make a dollar sing before I let it go. We worked hard, raised our kids with discipline and love, and by the time we retired, we had a modest but comfortable life. But as the years rolled on, I noticed something I couldn't ignore. The new generation doesn't see money the same way we did. My two grandchildren, Sophie, age 22, and Ethan, age 19, are proof of that. Don't get me wrong, I love them. When their mother, my daughter Linda, passed away unexpectedly 5 years ago, I stepped in as best as I could. Their father, well, let's just say he wasn't around much. He visited once in a blue moon, usually with a new girlfriend on his arm, and always left just as quickly as he came. So the kids leaned on me and I, in my grief, leaned on them. At first, it felt like a bond forged in sorrow. We cooked together, we laughed at old family movies, and they'd sleep over at my place more often than not. But as time went on, I noticed something else creeping in. Entitlement. Sophie was the ringleader, sharp-tongued, ambitious, but with her eyes always locked on material things. Designer bags, the newest phone, expensive lattes that cost more than I spent on groceries in a day. She had a way of making everything sound urgent, like if she didn't have the latest accessory, her entire social life would collapse. Ethan, on the other hand, was quieter but just as reckless. He didn't demand things the way Sophie did, but he followed her lead without hesitation. If Sophie wanted a new outfit for a party, Ethan wanted new shoes. If Sophie talked about needing money for essentials, Ethan would chime in that he needed cash for school projects, though the only projects he worked on were beer runs with his friends. And me? I was the fool who gave in. It started small. Sophie asked to borrow my debit card to pick up some groceries. She came back with a single loaf of bread, a jug of orange juice, and a receipt that showed she'd also spent $200 at a clothing store. When I asked her about it, she brushed me off. "Grandma, relax. I'll pay you back once I get my paycheck. You don't understand how things work now. Nobody carries cash anymore. It's all cards and apps. It's just easier if I use yours sometimes." Ethan wasn't much different. He once borrowed my credit card for gas, and I later discovered he'd taken a road trip with his friends, charging everything, food, hotel, even beer, on my account. When I confronted him, he muttered something about experiencing life and not wanting to miss out. At first, I told myself it was just kids being kids. I remembered being young and careless, though never to this degree. But then, one afternoon, things went too far. It was a chilly December morning when Sophie and Ethan showed up at my house, buzzing with excitement. "Grandma," Sophie chirped, "we're going shopping today. There's a huge sale at the outlet mall, and we want you to come with us. You deserve something nice, too." Her tone was sugary, almost too sweet. A red flag should have gone up right then, but I wanted to believe she meant it. So I agreed. I put on my warm coat, grabbed my purse, and let them drive me out to the outlet mall, an hour away from home. The car ride was filled with their chatter about what they wanted to buy. Sophie went on about a new designer handbag, while Ethan complained about his old sneakers ruining his vibe. When we arrived, Sophie turned to me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Grandma, can we just grab your card real quick? We'll take care of everything. You don't have to walk around. Just relax in the cafe. We'll even bring you something back." I hesitated. Something in my gut told me not to hand it over. But then Ethan leaned in, saying, "Come on, Grandma, we'll be quick. It's easier this way." And like a fool, I gave them my card. Hours passed. I sat in that cafe, nursing a lukewarm coffee, watching shoppers bustle in and out with bags upon bags of purchases. Every time the doors opened, I looked up, expecting to see Sophie and Ethan. But they didn't come. Finally, I pulled out my phone and called Sophie. Straight to voicemail. I tried Ethan's same thing. That sinking feeling in my chest grew heavier with each passing minute. I asked the barista if I could check my card balance online, but when I logged in, my heart nearly stopped. Thousands of dollars had been charged in just a few hours. Designer stores, sneaker shops, restaurants, even a hotel reservation. That's when it hit me. They weren't coming back. I sat there until the cafe closed, my legs stiff, my pride shattered. Eventually, a kind stranger noticed me and offered to call a cab. I didn't even have enough cash to pay for it. The driver had to wait while I went into my house and dug out some emergency money from my cookie jar. That night, I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the dark window, and I felt something inside me shift. This wasn't just carelessness anymore. This was betrayal. I had spent years telling myself I was helping them, that they needed me, that giving in was better than fighting. But being stranded like that, left alone in a mall cafe with nothing but a useless phone and an empty wallet, was the moment I realized something had to change. My grandkids didn't see me as their loving grandmother anymore. They saw me as a walking bank account, a bottomless source of money and forgiveness. And I decided right then and there that the next time they tried to take advantage of me, I wouldn't just stop them. I would teach them a lesson they'd never forget. I sat at my kitchen table for a long time after that night at the mall. The house was quiet except for the tick of the clock on the wall and the hum of the heater. I kept replaying their faces in my head. Sophie's practiced sweetness, Ethan's easy grin, the way they had vanished without a trace when the purchases started piling up. I felt foolish and furious in equal measure, and a stubborn part of me that had raised 2 children through rationed groceries and second-hand coats decided then I would not be their A-team any longer. The first instinct, the one most people might have had, was to call my daughter's ex and yell. The second instinct was to storm the mall and find my grandchildren myself. Neither felt right. What felt right was slow and careful, like an old recipe. I would not act from shame or anger. I would act from strategy. The next morning, still in my robe, I wrote down everything I could remember from that day. The time they left, the stores I had seen in their Instagram posts, the last 4 digits of my card that appeared on the receipts I could access from home. I dug through my purse and found the crumpled receipts from other days. Small evidence had a way of adding up. Then, I called Marjorie. Marjorie, I said when she picked up, I need a favor. Can you come by for tea? She arrived within the hour with a tin of shortbread and that steady, no-nonsense look she always got when something mattered. I told her everything. I didn't spare the embarrassment. I told her how they'd used my card and then left me sitting in a cafe. She listened, her face a map of sympathy and rising anger. Oh, Helen, she said finally, they took advantage of you, plain and simple. But you are not helpless. You've always been the one who fixes things. You taught me that. We talked through options. Marjorie's practical mind suggested contacting the bank immediately, canceling the card, and filing a report. She reminded me I had rights as a customer. Banks do take fraud seriously, dear. If they used your card without permission, you can report it. And if they were reselling stuff, you might be able to show a pattern. Pattern. The word had weight. That night, I called my bank. Mr. Lewis answered on the second ring. I had known him for years. He was polite, with that measured voice banks teach you to use when you're dealing with people's money. I explained the situation without drama, just the facts. My card was used for a huge number of purchases in a short span. The dates and times matched the mall trip, and I had been stranded so long I had to call a cab with spare change. Ma'am, I'm so sorry this happened, he said. The quickest step is to cancel this card immediately. I'll put a block on it and open an investigation for fraudulent charges. We'll request the transaction data from each merchant. If there were purchases without authorization, you won't be responsible for them. He was efficient, the kind of calm that settles you. He also said something I didn't expect. If you believe people you trusted used the card, we'll need to file a police report. We can't investigate a theft allegation without that. Police. The word sounded thorny. I had no desire to ruin my grandchildren's lives. Not permanently, but I had to think about consequences. I thought about the look on Ethan's face when he'd said he was experiencing life. What kind of life was that if it cost someone else her savings and dignity? Mr. Lewis gave me the bank's fraud claim form over the phone and the number for the local precinct. I agreed to come into the branch and talk in person. Before I drove in, I called my friend Marjorie back. "I'm going to the bank," I said. "You can come with me if you like." "Of course," she said. "And we'll make sure you don't go in looking like you might faint." Her humor steadied me. At the bank, Mr. Lewis was kind and professional. He printed the charges and went through them with me one by one. There were a dozen charges at the outlet mall and several online purchases. One merchant was at an address across town that sells designer handbags. Another was a retailer that sold expensive sneakers. The totals were shocking. "Given these charges and your statement that you didn't authorize them, we'll initiate a fraud investigation," Mr. Lewis said. "We'll dispute any charges that are proven fraudulent. I'll also set up proactive alerts on all future transactions and help you apply for a replacement card with a new number." "And the police?" I asked. "We'll cooperate fully," he said. "But be prepared. If they were family, if you name them, this could turn into a domestic theft case. Sometimes the strongest remedy is to separate access and protect your assets. We can also help you move funds into accounts with restricted access or set up a trust or joint account with controls so your card cannot be used without your presence." He said the word trust like it was a safe door. I liked the sound of it. Over the next week, I did more than cancel a card. I closed the old card and ordered a new one. I moved the bulk of my savings into a separate account that required in-branch withdrawals and authorizations, so it couldn't be emptied with an impulsive online purchase. I set up transaction alerts to my phone for anything over a modest amount. I spoke with my attorney about revising my will and adding a clause that left any inheritance in a managed trust until grandchildren proved they were responsible. I did not tell my grandchildren any of this. I didn't want them to know how fully I'd been watching. Meanwhile, Sophie and Ethan kept living like there'd been no consequence. The Instagram posts grew more extravagant. Sophie posted a video of herself unwrapping a new luxury bag, captioned, "Retail Therapy Saves Souls Nail Polish." Ethan posted pictures from a hotel stay, tagging friends, and an account that sold sneakers online. They were easy to find. Their confidence was effortless and, for me, the proof that they felt invincible, until they weren't. I also did something else quietly. I called a few of the stores where my card had been used and asked if they kept camera footage. One clerk was helpful and said they did, but that footage was generally kept for 30 days. She asked if I had filed a police report. I told her I was getting there. I wanted the merchants to preserve receipts and footage in case the police needed them. I filed the police report a week after my call with the bank. Detective Ramos was the man assigned to my case. He was young, but he spoke directly and with compassion. "Family cases are tough, Mrs. Crawford," he said. "We prefer people come forward and face it head-on. If you want us to look into the transactions, we'll do our best." The report was filed under the category of theft by false pretense. I named my grandchildren. It hurt to type their names into that official form. As I handed the copy to Detective Ramos, my hands trembled. "You did the right thing," he said simply. "This gives us something to work with. We'll issue preservation requests to the merchants and request the transaction data. If your grandchildren sold items or received funds from reselling, that will help us trace the money." After the report, Mr. Lewis called to say the bank had flagged several of the merchant accounts for review. "There's unusual activity," he said. "And once the merchants send us the sales records, we can see whether the buyers and resellers are linked to the same phone numbers or bank accounts. It's not uncommon for people who steal to try to launder items by reselling them. If we find links to accounts in your grandchildren's names, those accounts could be frozen, pending investigation." That last sentence sat in my mind like a stone tossed in a pond. I didn't want to ruin them forever. But I did want them to experience the smallest fraction of panic they'd left me with in that cafe that day. I wanted them to feel the jolt of their money disappearing when it mattered. I wanted them to understand that privileges come with responsibility. So I let the process run. I stayed quiet, carried on, and kept making my life ordinary but protected. In the weeks that followed the police report and the bank's initial inquiries, the grandkids' behavior shifted from casual arrogance to a scramble. Sophie texted me, coy at first. "Grandma,
How are you?
miss you." Hugs and kisses. I ignored it. Then the messages turned frantic. "Hey, you there? We tried calling. I let them pile up. Then the calls started. A friend of mine tipped me off that she'd overheard Sophie on the phone, voice shrill. "My card isn't working," she'd screamed. "I can't buy anything." Did Grandma cancel the card? Why would she do that? Sophie's friend was flustered. Buying takeout. That wouldn't come through. That was the first public crack. 2 nights later, I was at the grocery store when Ethan walked in with a new haircut and a band of friends. He strutted as if nothing was wrong. He looked for me, and then saw me. For a moment his face registered surprise, then something like panic. He walked over, forced a smile, and greeted me like he hadn't stolen my supper funds 2 months prior. "Hey, Grandma," he said. "We're, just grabbing some snacks." "Busy day." "Busy," I answered softly. "I hope the busy day included paying your dues." The words startled him. He shifted his weight, eyes darting toward the register. I watched in silence as he tried to pay, a slight hesitance, a whisper of embarrassment when his card declined. The cashier's face went blank. The friend stepped in with cash. Ethan's color rose, and he muttered an excuse and left quickly. Word spread. Their social circle is not small. By the time they tried to use cards in public again, a string of transactions had raised red flags. Multiple high-value items, rapid resales on secondhand markets, and some merchant accounts that had moved funds into accounts tied to Sophie and Ethan. That was when multiple banks and payment processors froze those accounts to investigate potential fraud. I didn't gloat. I had more sense than that. But I did not hide my satisfaction either. When Detective Ramos called to say that merchant records showed several resold items had been deposited into a third-party account linked to Sophie's phone number, and that PayPal had frozen funds, I felt vindicated. "We can bring this up with the prosecutor if you'd like," he said. I agreed. Sophie's Instagram started to come down. The glossy photos of handbags and hotels were gone, replaced by frantic help me messages from acquaintances and, privately, by please to me. "Grandma, please," Sophie messaged. "I didn't think about the consequences. I'll pay you back. Please don't get police involved." I read them, then closed the app. Ethan's calls were more childish in tone. "Grandma, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to hurt you. We'll return everything." He sounded raw. I remembered tucking 2 teenagers into bed when their mother first got sick and whispering promises that things would be okay. I'd kept those promises then. Now I had to keep promises to myself. Before any arrests or prosecutions, the banks had done their part. Several accounts belonging to Sophie and Ethan had been temporarily frozen after multiple suspicious merchant reports. Their debit transactions bounced. One by one, the spaces they'd filled with purchases and borrowed confidence began to empty. The first time I saw Sophie in public after the freeze, she was at a cafe, scrolling with a twitchy expression. She saw me, tried to straighten, and then the green came out, and her face fell. She approached, voice barely above a whisper. "Grandma, please, you have to help me unfreeze my account. I can't get my rent paid. Please." I listened. I could have marched them to the bank in a fury. I could have yelled, demanded restitution, and called the detectives into the room. But I had a better move: dignity and accountability. "I'll help you start to make things right," I said, "but only if you do honest work to fix it." The look on her face was part relief, part horror. "You will return what you can. You will do community service. You will sit with Detective Ramos and explain everything. If you're willing to accept responsibility, I will help you find a way to set up a repayment plan. I will not be your automatic fix anymore." Ethan, too, came to me, humbled. He apologized with a sincerity that felt new, almost as if the freezes had taught him the reality of consequence. "I thought I was invincible," he said. "I'm sorry. I don't want to be this person." I didn't say good. I said, then start making amends. What happened in the following months was not dramatic courtroom footage or glass-shattering revenge. It was slow, stubborn work. Sophie worked weekends at a boutique and returned items she could. Ethan took a job at a delivery warehouse, starting with the overnight shift. They met with Detective Ramos, who impressed upon them that while our case could end up being prosecuted, the more sincere and early their cooperation, the better the outcome might be. We made a list together of items to return, receipts to produce, and a way to reimburse smaller vendors. The bank didn't freeze their accounts forever, and that was not my intention. The freeze was a wake-up call, a legal and financial pause that exposed what had been going on. It cut off the easy money and forced them into labor and accountability. They had to face people they'd hurt, the boutique owner who'd believed Sophie was a bona fide buyer, the hotel clerks who'd accepted payment, the resellers who had unknowingly purchased stolen goods. Facing people and repaying them is a harder lesson than having funds frozen, but it's the one that lasts. At the same time, I tightened my own life. I had an attorney revise my estate plan and set up a trust that limited direct inheritance to one that released funds only when the grandchildren met clear benchmarks: employment, a financial literacy course, and proven restitution. That sounds heavy-handed, but I had seen what money unearned could do. I remembered the nights I scrubbed pots to pay rent and the dignity I felt when I finally earned something. It wasn't cruelty to require growth. It was a form of love wrapped in armor. Neighbors and friends noticed the change, and some were puzzled. "So, Mrs. Crawford," one asked as I returned a borrowed book, "what brought this on? You were always so indulgent." I smiled, because indulgence without boundaries is mercy that becomes harm. I quietly told them, sometimes tough love is what family needs. Not everyone approved. A few relatives whispered that I'd been harsh, that I should have forgiven and paid quietly. But those were the same voices that had watched Sophie lean across my lap and take my coffee with a smile. I didn't change my mind. Months later, when the court's diversion program was discussed with the prosecutor, Sophie and Ethan were eligible because they'd voluntarily cooperated, returned goods, and enrolled in financial counseling. The charges could be dismissed if they completed the terms. I did not cheer. I sat quietly and signed forms that gave them the path to redemption, not because I felt sorry for them, but because I believed people can change. In the end, the bank's freeze was not the punishment so much as the hinge that swung a door open. It made them stop. It made them look at the damage they'd done. It made them stand in line and talk to merchants and figure out how to submit receipts and apologize to clerks. It made them work. And when they worked, people saw them as people again, not as entitled consumers. The community gave them a wary chance. I watched them start to rebuild, step by slow step. It was never pretty. It was never effortless. But it was work. Honest, humbling labor, and that was precisely what I wanted them to learn. There was a moment months after the freeze when Sophie stood in my kitchen, hair pulled back and eyes red from crying, and said, "Grandma, I'm sorry. I thought I could get by like this forever." I reached up and smoothed her hair, an old reflex. "I know you're sorry," I said. "Now show me, every day, what that means." She nodded. Ethan worked double shifts and changed the way he carried himself. He apologized to a cashier he'd sneered at and left the store a little embarrassed but proud. Small things mattered. I won't pretend there were no nights I lay awake thinking I'd been too harsh. But then I'd remember the cold, the cafe, the way my wallet had felt like a wound. I remembered that if I hadn't acted, they would have kept taking, and someday the bill would have been far worse. So I kept my house warm, my account safe, and my hands open, but only for work that showed responsibility. Love isn't unlimited if it destroys the person you love. I had to protect myself as much as I tried to protect them. And the bank freeze? It became a story people told as a caution, not a tale of a grandmother's vindictiveness, but of a grandmother who refused to be used. It was a lesson that money teaches best when it's tied to character. When the whole thing had settled into a new, steadier rhythm, Sophie and Ethan sat down with me and a counselor to make a plan for the future. They apologized to neighbors, repaid vendors as much as they could, and enrolled in community workshops on money management. It wasn't glamorous, it was repair. Sometimes the sweetest revenge isn't putting someone in their place. It's helping them find their place, but only after they've learned not to treat others as stepping stones. That was the conclusion I reached as I brewed a pot of tea one evening and watched Sophie sweep the kitchen without being asked. There was humility in her movement now, and that meant more than any returned handbag or frozen bank account. I never wanted hatred to sit at our table. I wanted respect. And slowly, painfully, with banks and police and a lot of hard work, we found our way back to a new kind of family, one built on earned trust instead of entitlement. The days after I froze those accounts were strangely peaceful. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a prisoner to my own family's demands. I sat at my kitchen table with a cup of tea and actually enjoyed the silence. Of course, the peace didn't last long. By the end of the week, there's a pounding at my door so loud it nearly shook it off the hinges. When I opened it, all four of them stood there, Emily, Connor, Kayla, and Marcus, looking more like a gang of angry debt collectors than grandchildren. "Grandma," Emily snapped, her voice high-pitched with panic. "Why did you freeze the accounts? We can't pay rent. We can't buy groceries. We can't even buy gas. What are we supposed to do?" I folded my arms and leaned against the doorframe, calm in a way that made them fidget. "You mean, what are you supposed to do now that you can't steal from me anymore?" Their faces twisted. Connor waved his useless debit card in the air. Kayla whined about losing her spa appointment. Marcus muttered something about Christmas being ruined. I let them vent, then cut through the noise. "You left me stranded," I said, my voice sharp. "You took my cards, humiliated me, treated me like an afterthought. And now you want sympathy because you can't keep living off me? You're grown adults. Figure it out." For a moment, they stood there stunned. But entitlement is hard to kill. Emily jabbed her finger at me. "You're supposed to help us. That's what family does." "Family doesn't abandon their grandmother at a checkout line like trash," I shot back. "Family doesn't see me as an ATM. You took advantage of me, and now you're shocked that the well has run dry. Too bad." They stormed off that night, but it wasn't the last I saw of them. Over the next few weeks, the calls poured in. Messages full of crying, bargaining, even threats. Connor accused me of ruining their lives. Kayla left voicemails about how a real grandma would never do this. Marcus came to my porch once with flowers, trying to play sweet, only to storm off when I didn't cave. I didn't flinch. Not once. Because I wasn't done yet. What they didn't know was that I had already sat down with my lawyer. For years, my will had them written in. I'd planned to leave each of them a fair share of what I'd worked my whole life to save. But the night they abandoned me at that grocery store, something in me snapped. "Cut them out," I told my lawyer. "Every last one of them." He raised an eyebrow, but he didn't argue. Instead, he asked, "Who should benefit instead?" "To people who actually care," I said. "Charities, programs, scholarships. Kids who remind me of myself. Hungry, hardworking, grateful. Not entitled." And just like that, everything changed. I didn't tell my grandchildren. Why would I? Let them keep thinking money would save them someday. Let them keep living under that illusion. Do you know what the bitter irony is? Cutting them off didn't just free me financially, it freed me emotionally. I started spending holidays with neighbors, church friends, and people who actually enjoyed my company. For the first time in years, I laughed at Christmas instead of dreading it. But my grandchildren? They didn't change. They still show up sometimes, banging on my door, begging for help. "Just a little for rent, Grandma. Just one more chance, Grandma." Their faces are a mix of anger and desperation. But I don't budge. Because I realized something important. They didn't want me. They wanted my money. And once you see that truth, you can't unsee it. So yes, I'm still here. I'm still living my life, and I'm still holding the line. They took from me once. They left me stranded once. But I made sure they'll never leave me stranded again. And that, to me, is the sweetest kind of revenge, living long enough to watch them realize that their choices cost them everything.